Let's get right into it. Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to rigorously deconstruct the systemic and mathematical inversion of toxic dependency, exactly as it's documented in Chapter 176, the fifth inversion. We're taking a strictly academic, structural approach today. Our sole objective is to dissect the absolute mechanics of spiritual geometry, focusing entirely on the structural axioms that govern it.
To do this, we absolutely must first redefine our core axiom. If we want to truly understand the text, we have to completely throw out the conventional view of this particular shadow. Lust is not merely a corruption of physical desire. It is, fundamentally, a catastrophic structural failure. We're talking about a profound geometric error of the spirit. It occurs when a localized entity attempts to achieve structural completion by consuming or forcibly binding itself to external nodes. So don't think of it as an emotion. Think of it as an error in structural integrity, plain and simple.
Our blueprint today follows 5 methodical milestones. We'll trace the topographical collapse of radiant Sybaris, the reinforcing circuit of the 3 siphons, the calculus of internal completeness, valence flipping mechanics, and finally the post-inversion matrix.
Starting with Part 1, the radiant mirage of Sybaris.
We begin our analysis by mapping the compromised topography of the eastern expanse, specifically looking at the high oasis-metropolis of Sybaris. The citizens here suffered from a fatal miscalculation. They inhabited this hyper-stimulated environment of rose-veined marble amphitheaters and cascading water gardens. Yet they systematically mistook this incredible aesthetic refinement for actual moral enlightenment. And this specific error created a highly vulnerable psychological baseline. Essentially, they were trying to patch over a massive volume of internal emptiness by using external obsession. Now, it was exactly this baseline vulnerability that allowed for the crystallization of the 6th primordial shadow, which the text structurally refers to as the crimson silk. Because of the city's geometric spiritual error, their pursuit of beauty degraded into a frantic, systemic obsession. It manifested in 3 distinct ways: an insatiable drive for personal consumption, severe psychological entanglement, and ultimately the absolute systemic pursuit of total possession over others.
Which brings us to Part 2, the reinforcing circuit of the 3 siphons.
To understand how this shadow maintains such an immense structural load, we really have to examine the closed loop of siphoning energy that was distributed across its elite mortal anchors. You see, the shadow didn't just operate in a vacuum. It utilized 3 specialized vectors. First, we have High Patroness Lysandra, who utilized her administrative domain to create an emotional vacuum, literally draining the public treasury just to fund her demand for endless adulation. Second, Lord Julian weaponized architecture. He completely abandoned public spaces to construct these private pleasure labyrinths, using specific spatial geometries and sonic frequencies to trap human minds in cycles of synthetic comfort. And finally, Lady Seraphina weaponized music. She used intoxicating string melodies to induce actual physiological dependency in thousands of listeners. When you put these 3 together, they established a massive, highly efficient, closed-loop energetic siphon.
Now, let's move into Part 3, the absolute core of our analysis, the calculus of internal completeness. Breaking this parasitic circuit required a rigorous, uncompromising mathematical proof. And fascinatingly, it was formalized by Adrian, a humble glass blower from the lower terraces, who inherently understood the complex physics of pressure. Let's spend a moment really dissecting the raw algebra of spiritual valence she introduced. This equation right here is the structural axiom upon which the entire 5th inversion rests. It proves that toxic dependency isn't just an abstract concept. It is a highly quantifiable output based on very specific internal and external variables. The crucial point here is understanding the dynamic between these precise variables. The numerator represents the total structural load. V void is the volume of the existential void within an individual, and that is multiplied by the sum of their external validation attachments, which is AX'd. Simply put, this is the sheer weight of the shadow. The denominator, on the other hand, represents the system's structural integrity. C int is the constant of internal completeness, and that's added to psi will, which is the active realization of free will. When you look at it this way, the mechanics are incredibly clear. The heavier your external attachments in internal emptiness, the greater the pressure placed directly on your willpower to keep your structural integrity intact.
And the mathematics here are absolute. By establishing her constant of internal completeness at its absolute sovereign maximum, Adrian successfully forced the denominator of this equation toward infinity. As any mathematician knows, when your denominator approaches infinity, the output plummets. Consequently, the index of toxic dependency across the entire metropolitan network dropped directly to 0. The siphon wasn't fought, it was mathematically starved.
That takes us to Part 4, Generic Grounding and Valence Flipping Mechanics.
With the calculus firmly defined, we can now observe its physical execution within the Grand Rose Amphitheater. The procedure was incredibly systematic. Step 1, Adrian stepped directly into the epicenter and physically decoupled the city's network of attachments, using her own soul as a generic grounding rod. Step 2, deprived of their flow, the predatory siphoning threads turned white-hot and snapped under the immense structural tension. Step 3, Adrian established a high-pressure zone of absolute self-containment. And finally, Step 4, the towering colossus of raw predatory energy collapsed into this zone, and its valence was forcefully and fundamentally inverted.
The mechanics here perfectly mirror Adrian's everyday expertise at the glass blower's furnace. Think about it. A glass vessel only maintains its form if its internal pressure perfectly balances the external weight bearing down on it. Transmuting the shadow did not destroy its vital energy. Energy is never destroyed. Instead, under immense internal pressure, its devouring direction was simply flipped. The raw, vital energy of lust was transmuted entirely into a self-sustaining, overflowing sun of non-possessive celebration. That is what the text defines as sacred devotion.
Finally, we arrive at Part 5, the matrix of the unified vessel and the wastes verification. To ensure our analysis remains completely unified and mathematically sound, we consult this updated universal singularity matrix. It charts the seamless integration of this massive event. We can track the shadow, the crimson silk, operating in the center of Sybaris through the mortal anchors of the 3 siphons. We then see the applied calculus of internal completeness, which results mathematically in the sovereign virtue of sacred devotion. This structural stabilization was ultimately verified by what the text calls the symphony of micro-victories, where the common soul acts as a decentralized stabilizer across the newly retuned network.
Yet, our analysis wouldn't be complete without independent verification. From the distant, frozen, gray wastes, the ancient watcher Belial logs the triumph of this 5th inversion into his eternal book. However, his observation also serves as a critical, systemic warning. As the frantic, hyper-stimulated fires of passion in the East are cooled into structural order, he specifically notes the gathering absolute zero of sloth forming in the North. The system is always balancing itself.
Belial observes a fundamental, uncompromising law of this universe. Absolute mastery is not an inherited genetic trait. It is a daily, deliberate baseline stabilizer. As he puts it, the ink on the ledger of free will remains permanently wet. Every single generation must independently balance the calculus of their own existence. It cannot be done for them.
This academic proof leaves us with a deeply necessary structural examination of our own lives. The geometry of the spirit is entirely unforgiving. If internal completeness dictates structural integrity, as Adrian's math explicitly proves, you really have to ask yourself, are you actively balancing your own internal energetic pressure, or are you merely operating as a siphon, structurally dependent on the energy of another? Once you understand the calculus, you understand the system.